Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Wow.
Today we are going to
Walaikum.
talk about the second chapter of this book, that is Introduction to Psycholinguistics. So the second chapter is about, is language restricted to humans? So this is the question which has been asked today, or which is going to be asked today in this chapter. And inshallah, we will try to find out the answer of this question. So far as the objectives of this class are concerned, there are two objectives of this class. Judging by newspaper and popular books, okay, there appear to be a vast number of animals which talk. For example, the book mentions talking budgerigars, talking dolphins, even talking fish. Okay, so clearly we need to distinguish between the word. On the very first page, the book defines the word talk, saying that it has got two meanings. For example, it says to talk means to utter words. Number two, it means to use language in a meaningful way. Now, psycholinguists would like to investigate whether animals can talk in a meaningful way. In the very first sense, for example, to utter words, we come across parrots. Parrots, they utter words. We come across birds. We come across, many kinds of animals. They utter words. Though some of the words we cannot understand, but some of the words we can understand. For example, if you teach a parrot some words, the parrot can talk. But we need to investigate further that whether they can talk in a meaningful way or not. Can all animals talk in a meaningful way or not? So the very first two things that Jean Aitcheson introduces in this chapter is that to talk means to utter words, and number two, to talk means to convey meaning, to convey or to use language in a meaningful way. Psycholinguists are interested in this research because they want to know the answer to the following question. Are we the only species which possess language? So is it the only human beings who possess language? If so, are we the only species capable of acquiring it? If you remember the very first chapter, we talked about three things: that how human beings decode the language, understand the language, how human beings encode the language, produce the language, how human beings can acquire the language. So these were the three questions they were asked in the very first chapter. Now in the second chapter, our question is that is it the human beings only who possess language? And if so, are we the only species capable of acquiring it? This current chapter examines these topics based on Aitcheson's views, okay? That is the book, The Articulate Mammal. First, animal communication systems are compared with human language to examine whether animals can be considered to talk in any real sense. Second, various attempts to teach languages to animals are put into consideration. So first of all, Jean Aitcheson talks about the difference between animal and human communication, and he will be talking about 8 or 9 different characteristics that we usually say that they are the part or they are the attributes of human communication. We would love to see that whether these characteristics be applied to animals too or not. Secondly, we would like to see various attempts that the psycholinguists have made to teach language to animals, and what are their results. So this will be in the second portion. Do animals talk naturally? On page number 23 of your book, again the question is, do animals talk naturally. To answer the question, the first task is to investigate whether any animals naturally have a true language. Then we have to compare human language with animal communication. So we need to understand, as human beings, they have been provided with a system. Again, we will have to remember Chomsky, who said that human beings have got innate system. Okay, so that innate system, we will have to see that whether these animals, they also have got or not. Aitcheson proposes here two special problems to be discussed before a coherent reply to the question, do animals talk naturally, can be given. The first problem is, are we comparing systems which differ quantitatively or qualitatively? Remember, here we are not going to deal with numbers. So of course, we have talked about in the very first chapter that we will be looking at the hypothesis. And if those hypotheses, they get the evidence, then hypothesis is proved. And if there is not proper evidence, then hypothesis is rejected. So what psycholinguists do is that they would love to make hypotheses. Then they would be looking at the kind of sentences that human beings, children, young human beings, they are making, and then they will be analyzing those utterances against the hypothesis that they have made. This way they will be checking whether this hypothesis should be accepted or should be rejected. So it is not always easy to decide what counts as communication in animals, remember, okay? But we would love to answer this question qualitatively. There are two theories that Jean Aitcheson discusses in this book, that is continuity and discontinuity theory, to answer the question, are we comparing systems which differ quantitatively or qualitatively? But I don't know, he just talks about these two theories, and within 2 pages, okay, without elaborating these two theories clearly, he finishes this talk and he moves on to discuss the characteristics of human communication. Anyways, these theories are continuity theory. It is about the means of communication in a continuous line of growth. So if we look at the human beings, they continuously evolve. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. So this is how human beings, they evolve, grow. And this is how the language, it also grows. So this is the continuity theory. Discontinuity theory is about the differences, the basic of animal heritage, and it is superimposed on it. Language is a complex mosaic, you remember, a mosaic. It's hodgepodge. It is not just one thing. It's a mixture of different things, because in the mind, and our mind, it's a super computer. It works so quickly. There are complex systems in which some features are continuous, remember, and some are discontinuous with animal communication. And actually, animal is intentionally trying to convey information surrounding it. Remember what animal can convey, of course, we will be reading in the next pages as well. If the bee is in trouble, of course, the bee is going to make movements. If the bee finds that there is some food, the bee is going to make some movement, some kind of dance. It is going back, okay, in his or her home. It is going to tell the other members of his or her community that there is some kind of food available over there. So then they should move. So they do a special kind of dance, okay? Then Jean Aitcheson talks about, without finishing this distinction between continuity and discontinuity theory, he comes to essential nature of human communication. And he talks about almost 9 to 10 different characteristics of essential nature of human communication. And if you remember your first class, and if I recall what I read, so though there are no headings given in the book, but you will have to read very carefully, okay, this book, and you will find that after 3 or 4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, new characteristic is being discussed. Okay, so there are almost 10 characteristics. The first one the first one is the vocal auditory channel. Number two is arbitrariness. Okay. Number three is semanticity. Number 4 is cultural transmission, spontaneous usage. Number 6 is turn taking. Of course, sometimes one person talks, sometimes the other person talks. Anyways, later on in detail. Then there is duality, which Jean Aitcheson talks about, displacement, structure dependence, creativity. And there are certain other things. For example, human beings have the ability that they can read the intentions of the other people. And then they have the ability that they lie also. I don't know whether animals they can lie or not, uh, but human beings they lie. So much so, even if you look at the behavior of the children who are learning the language, they also lie. So this capacity of the human beings that they lie, it is also one of the characteristics of human language. But I think these things Jean Aitcheson does not talk about. So let us discuss each of these features in turn and see whether it is present in animal communication or not. If any animal naturally possesses all of the designed features of human language, then there is a clear-cut evidence that animals can also talk. Okay, but of course, when we will be reading, and if you keep on reading page number 25 and keep on moving, you will come across that under each characteristic that I have just talked about, he discusses the behavior of the animals as well, and then he explains that whether they can uh, uh, do they have such type of characteristic in their language or not. So let us see. The first one was that is the auditory vocal auditory uh, channel. Now we all know that Allah Almighty has bestowed us with vocal cords, and these vocal cords, when the child is born, they are very soft. Okay, so whatever language the people are speaking, the child is prone to, is supposed to learn or acquire that language. So of course these vocal cords are molded. Okay, they mold themselves according to the language they are learning. So that is why some of the sounds, though they can utter, but they are difficult for us. For example, for Punjabis, the sound of ja, ja, which is in pleasure, pleasure. Okay, it is difficult to pronounce. So many Punjabis, they will say pleasure, or they may say pleasure. Okay, they are unable to pronounce this sound correctly. So same is the case with the Pathans. They also have some problem with pa, and I think ka sound, or pa, or
P and F, P and F.
fa sound.
Like you pronounce kefe, kefe is a kefe,
Yeah,
and Pakistan is a Pakistan.
yeah.
Excuse
So
me,
yeah.
सर कुछ स्टूडेंट्स का वो लीव हो गया तो आप प्लीज एक्सेप्ट करिए
Okay.
मीटिंग.
So these vocal cords, they get molded with the passage of time. When people they are learning the language, so whatever sounds they are speaking, so children they try to acquire those sounds, and when they are speaking those sounds, so in this way they are capable of speaking and uttering or producing only those sounds which they are hearing. That is why they find it difficult, okay, to to speak the other sounds of the languages, some other languages. So sounds are made with the vocal organs, and a hearing mechanism receives them. So Allah Almighty has given us the ears as well. So the first of all, of course, we listen to the sounds, and then we are supposed to produce those sounds. So the advantage of this method of producing the sound are that it leaves the body free to carry on other activities at the same time. And it also acquires relatively little physical energy. This characteristic of little use, remember, in an attempt to differentiate between animal and human communication. Because vocal cords, as we have got, animals too, they can utter sounds. Animals too, they can utter the kinds of sounds that they are supposed to utter, of course. So language can be transferred without loss to visual symbols, and patients who have had their vocal cords removed can communicate mainly by writing. So it means that their system of language they have not lost. So even if you remove these vocal cords, okay, from human beings too, okay, so they can write the language, they can talk to the other people through their written expressions. So this was the first characteristic that we thought that it is only for the human beings, but of course even this is not very much important to human beings, but animals they also have vocal channel. Then next thing that characteristic that Jean Aitcheson talks about is arbitrariness. Arbitrariness means that human languages are neutral symbols. There is no one-on-one connection between the word dog and the four-legged animal it symbolizes. Okay, and the word pen and the object pen, or the word fan and the object fan. And you know, this is quite old idea. Chomsky has talked about, or even before Chomsky, there were people they talked about this, arbitrariness. So human language, though if, for example, a Martian comes here and you talk to the Martian and you say dog, do you think Martian will be able to recognize the dog if the object is not over there? So uh, arbitrariness means human languages are neutral symbols. So we can conclude that here that arbitrariness cannot be regarded as a critical distinction between human and animal communication. It is also not a very critical distinction. When you teach, a parrot dog, this word a parrot can also utter, and parrot can come to know that if somebody is saying dog and dog is in fact there, so parrot can say dog. As a child learns with the passage of time that it's a dog. And these days I hear sometimes when I'm walking around, okay, in my streets, and people they keep on changing the pronunciation of the words. So instead of saying dog they say doggy, and instead of saying cat they say catto. So there is no arbitrariness between the form and the function, between the form and the object. Okay, and this is not a very clear cut distinction, or we can say it is not a kind of uh, the kind of distinction that we should say that on the basis of this we can differentiate between animals and humans. Now, the third one that Aitcheson talks about, it is important one. And of course, it has got some worth in it because it is about semanticity. So semanticity, you know that semantics you have already read. Semantics deals with meaning, and we know there are surface meanings, there are deeper meanings, and we know that there are, different figures of speeches, and figures of speeches meaning they keep on changing. Then, idioms. So this semanticity is one of the characteristics, okay, that you can only label to human beings. This semanticity, I think, animals they cannot have. So semanticity, the third suggested test for language ability, is the use of symbols to mean or refer to objects and actions. To a human, a chair means a four-legged object you can sit on. Furthermore, semanticity applies to actions as well as objects. For example, the word jump, it can be a verb. Okay, he jumped from the window, or the act of jumping. So jumping can be here noun as well, or jumping again can be the ing form of verb. For example, to jump means the act of leaping in the air. Some writers have claimed, and Aitcheson says this thing in the book as well, that some psycholinguists they have claimed that semanticity is exclusively human. So you should keep this thing in your mind that animals, they do not have this characteristic. There is no semanticity in their language. They have certain words and they can use those certain words. They have certain dances, movements of the body, and whenever they are in trouble, whenever they are in fear, so then of course they make use of their bodies and they make use of their you know, uh, language. Otherwise, semanticity does not exist in animal communication. The fourth characteristic that Jean Aitcheson discusses is on page number 27, cultural transmission. So cultural transmission or tradition indicates that human beings transfer their language down from one generation to another. So you have learned the language through or from your parents while staying with them in the society, while becoming part of home in which you were living. Okay, so of course, in this way, you learned the language. In this way, you acquired the vocabulary items, you acquired, okay, the kinds of words, the kinds of structures that people they were speaking, and of course we also learned all these things. So cultural transmission is language, it moves or transfers from one generation to another generation. The role played by teaching in animal communication is unclear, remember, and it varies from animal to animal and even with species. And evidence is that a child brought up in isolation away from human beings does not acquire language. So at the same time, we should know that if the child is not provided human beings, society, okay, facilities of home, and if he does not come across people who are speaking this language that he is supposed to learn, she is supposed to learn, then he or she is not going to learn that language. So again, he or me, she may utter some sounds, but he or she may not communicate with you. Again, in the meaning that he has discussed, that talk means to utter words or talk means to convey the language in a meaningful way. So that child who lives in isolation may not be able to convey the language in a meaningful way. In contrast, birds reared, brought up in isolation, sing songs that are sometimes recognizable, though they also have some problems, okay, but at least already we cannot understand their language, or some of the things we understand. So if that bird lives in isolation, he may acquire some of those sounds, okay. So it is not a very, you could say, distinguishing characteristic, though of course it also plays a major role in differentiating between human and animal communication. But still, if somebody is living in isolation, if a child is living in isolation, so it is very difficult for that child, okay, to learn that language. Then on page number 28 of your book, uh, Jean Aitcheson talks about the fifth and sixth characteristics, and he says that they are social ones in that they relate to the way in which language is used. So that is called spontaneity and turn taking. So, of course, our spoken language is spontaneous. We come across those questions that we do not have in our mind. Sometimes students, they do ask such type of questions as well. So then we will have to think and rethink before we satisfy that student. So you also come across that sometimes your friends, they may say something, okay, which you were not expecting. So sometimes they say sorry, sometimes you make them say sorry to you, okay. So our language is spontaneous. But when it comes to writing, then of course we think, rethink, we produce, we reproduce, okay, we enact and we reenact. So spontaneous usage uh, indicates that uh, human initiate speech freely. Speaking is not something which they do under forcible restriction. So nobody can force us to speak. We speak when we like to speak, or like a dog, okay, that will stand on its hind legs only when a biscuit is held above its nose, for example. You cannot force a dog to, stand on legs that he has got behind. So this feature is certainly not restricted to humans, and many animals use their natural communication systems freely. So as we speak freely, the dogs or the animals, they also speak freely. But so far as turn taking is concerned, okay, वैसे तो पाकिस्तान में I have seen that many people start speaking at the same time, ठीक है. But anyways, we will say that there is turn taking. So usually first one person speaks and then the second person answers and then the third person or the first person again. So this is the characteristic of human communication. But turn taking you may not find in animal communication. You may come across dogs barking at the same time. Okay. Then the other characteristic, next characteristic given on the same page, we can call it the seventh property of human communication is duality or double articulation. Duality or double articulation. A duality or double articulation means that language is organized into two layers. The basic sound units of speech, such as pa, I, ga. So these are the three different.
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but what is meant by structure dependence here?
We will come
You
to it.
talked about
It is our seventh or eighth characteristic. We will come to it.
Okay.
So right now we are dealing with seventh characteristic. Okay. So the structure dependence we have already talked about in unit 1 as well, if you remember. But anyways, I'll repeat it again. So duality or double articulation means that language is organized into two layers. The basic sound units of speech, such as pa, I, ka. So if we combine these three sounds, so we will get pig. So are normally meaningless by themselves. Pa itself alone in isolation, this sound is meaningless. Ga alone is meaningless. But when pa, I and ga, they are put together, they are combined. So then we get a word that is called pig, and it becomes a meaningful word. They only become meaningful when combined into sequences such as pa, I, and ga, pig. This property is sometimes claimed to be unique to humans too. But again, this is not so. Duality is also present in bird songs where each individual note is itself meaningless. So it is the combination of their notes that they are making, the combination of dance that they are making, which convey meaningful messages. So once again, we have not found a critical difference between animal and human communication so far as this characteristic is concerned. In fact, we are coming closer to the end of this meeting. So I think I should take questions. And then we have discussed 7 characteristics. So after 10 minutes break, we can discuss the rest of the characteristics if you like. Or later on, we can finish it in next lecture. So do you have any questions right now or any problem? Is this clear to you?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Actually, I want to confirm that spontaneity is like ability of human that you can speak whenever you want to or whenever you like to. But
Yes.
can we say that animals also acquire that thing, that they also have a will that when they want to speak and when they do not want to speak as well?
Yes, of course, of course. And I have said that this is one of the characteristics that animal communication has got to. So spontaneity is not one of the characteristics that we will use to differentiate between human and animal communication.
So we can say that this.
We talked about turn taking, and here I said that it is one of the characteristics of human communication, though sometimes we also behave like animals when all the people they start speaking at the same time.
And okay, sir. And then another thing that you have referred that there are two theories. One is continuity and